Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode review of Dark Side of the Ring. Finally, right? I know. Sorry about that. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to do any of the Dark Side of the Ring reviews like I said I was going to do last year. Better late than never, right? I'm starting from season 1 to season 3 since I already did season 4, but if season 5 comes out anytime, I might pause and go back to where I left off after the season finale of season 5. If there is a season 5, that is. The reason why I want to do the episode review is because you guys actually seem to like them and have been really supportive, so I decided to start from the beginning. In the first episode, it talks about the lives and love of the late Randy Savage and the late Miss Elizabeth. I never watched wrestling in the 90s, only 1998, and snippets throughout the years. I do remember seeing clips of Randy Savage, the Macho Man, being in NWO, and later seeing him and Miss Elizabeth being in love. I also remember the snake that they got from their wedding. Pretty creepy if you ask me. It's really sad what happened to each of them dying so soon though. I'll be glad to rewatch it, summarize, and give my review on the first episode of Dark Side of the Ring. Randy was born Randy Mario Puffo in Columbus, Ohio, on November 15, 1952. His father's name was Angelo Puffo, who was a first-generation wrestler, as Randy was a second-generation. His father was a very popular wrestler in the 1950s. Lanny Puffo is Randy's little brother, and remembers Randy being a bedwetter during their childhood years. Randy wanted to be a villain in wrestling because he said it was more creative, so he played as a crazy character on and off screen. In this episode, Bruce Pritchard said while being interviewed that you have to live your gimmick outside of wrestling in order to be a big star. We also see Linda, the ex-wife of Hulk Hogan, as she shows her autograph table in which Hulk and Randy signed. Miss Elizabeth, whose real name was Elizabeth Ann Hewlett, was born on November 19, 1960, at Frankfort, Kentucky. Elizabeth's father left when she was young, leaving her and her family in financial struggles. She met Randy at Sin, the sports center. They worked in ICW, as Elizabeth was an announcer and did editing for the show, as it was a small wrestling company. They soon got married and went to WWF, which is now WWE. Vince McMahon thought it would be best for Randy to have a valet, which means lady, by his side. Randy chose his wife Elizabeth out of all the wrestling managers, as Elizabeth did not have any wrestling experience. The wrestling crew wanted the audience to love Miss Elizabeth and hate Randy. The writers wrote Randy and Elizabeth as a verbal couple, in which Randy mistreats Elizabeth poorly. Soon enough, Randy and Elizabeth were the top stars after being in WWF for 2 years. Scott Hall said in this episode that he wanted to bang Randy because he thought Randy was so cool. I know, right? That's kind of gross. Randy eventually faced Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, and it is considered one of the greatest matches of all time. Although Randy is supposed to be the villain, the audience loved him as he got more popular, even though villains are usually hated. As Randy was on top, the problem started to increase with his marriage. This caused Randy to be overprotective of Elizabeth, since the men in the locker room can be tough to handle or be around with. Randy sometimes kept Miss Elizabeth in the dressing room or in a closet while he was out wrestling. He sometimes confided in Linda, who sometimes came to wrestling events for her then husband Hulk Hogan. Linda recalls the first time meeting Elizabeth by helping her fix Elizabeth's hair, and would soon become close friends. Hulk also became really close friends with Randy as he came to Hulk's parties. At SummerSlam 1988, Randy and Hulk faced each other for a match to have Miss Elizabeth. Tensions rose as Randy became paranoid and jealous of Hulk because he won the match and took his woman. However, it was only for the storyline in wrestling, not in real life. Jimmy Hart and Jake the Snake Roberts explain in this episode that Randy was very controlling of Elizabeth. Randy supposedly wanted Elizabeth to come into the ring the way he wanted so that people would not laugh at her or check her out. Instead of partying on the road, Randy and Elizabeth went straight to bed. While on the road, Elizabeth and Linda would take care of their husbands by cleaning their boots. Being on the road for the ladies was most likely difficult, as the big guys, wrestlers, would go to the bathroom in their suitcases or make offensive jokes. Randy did not want Elizabeth around the guys because they were rough, giving Elizabeth no freedom. This made Elizabeth frustrated and sad as she wanted more friends and some socialization, so she took some time off. Randy later became the villain, the Macho King, and worked with Sensational Sherry, but fans were not happy with this outcome and preferred Miss Elizabeth. Randy and Ultimate Warrior fought in a career type of match, and if Randy lost, he would leave the WWF. I can't remember who won, but Sensational Sherry turned on Randy and Elizabeth saves Randy, followed by Randy proposing to Elizabeth, and she then said yes. Although Randy and Elizabeth were married already for 7 years, before proposing on TV, their characters tied the knot in 1991. At the wedding, the audience saw a happier Randy, which was rare since his character, the Macho Man, was hyper or crazy most of the time. Jake brought a cobra to the ring as a wedding present. The cobra bit Jake before going to the ring, and then once the box opened, Randy was bit everywhere by the snake in a crazy, weird, funny, violent way. When they got married on WWF, Randy's real-life marriage with Elizabeth started to crumble. Around the time Hulk Hogan was shooting a movie, he called Randy if he could come over. Elizabeth overheard and asked Randy if she could go, and Randy said yes, but only as she babysits and stays with Linda the entire day. While Elizabeth was with Hulk and Linda without Randy by her side, Elizabeth took this chance to be with another man. A couple of hours after Elizabeth was with the Hogans, Randy called Linda to ask if Elizabeth was there, and she told him that Elizabeth was with friends. Randy then went ballistic and came over to where Elizabeth and the Hogans were while Hulk was shooting his movie. Linda said it was the first time she saw Randy go insane, and he forced Linda to stay in a chair while he looked for Elizabeth. Randy blamed Hulk for his marriage problems, but it was not Hogan's fault. Randy's marriage was in shambles. Not only was Randy's marriage over, but so was his friendship with Hulk until the late 2000s. After the incident, Linda called Elizabeth and she told Linda that she had left Randy and went to Miami. Randy became really depressed after the marriage with Elizabeth was over. After that, Randy joined WCW, World Championship Wrestling, WWF's biggest competition at the time. Randy left WWF because he did not want to do color commentary anymore, so he went on to WCW. Although Randy and Elizabeth were still divorcing at the time, Randy left for WWF. He invited her to join WCW, which she did, but as a heel, while Randy was face. Randy gives Elizabeth a $250,000 contract for a year. As Elizabeth made her WCW appearance, she had changed drastically, as not only was she dating Lex Luger, but he was still married at the time. Lex Luger was considered the next Hulk Hogan in the late 1990s. Elizabeth was madly in love with Lex, but their storyline relationship evolved into a secret love affair. Although they had broken up, Randy was still protective over Elizabeth and worried due to the fact that Lex had not divorced from his wife while being in a relationship with Elizabeth. They did live next to his wife, though. One night led to Lex going to jail. Elizabeth and Lex started taking drugs around this time in their relationship, but that night Elizabeth fell down the stairs. She had 2 black eyes caused by Lex and reported him a couple hours later. Lex was charged with battery, but they continued their relationship, sadly. Elizabeth's drug habits were so bad that supposedly she took a lot of pills as a 300-pound person would. However, she was around 85 pounds. Eric Bischoff talked about bringing Lex to his podcast on this episode, but he eventually denied Lex because he still holds resentment towards Lex after what had happened to Elizabeth. In a voice call heard in this episode, Lex talks about the day that Elizabeth overdosed on vodka and pills. Lex called 911 when Elizabeth stopped breathing. While on the phone, Lex was told by the operator to do CPR on Elizabeth, but he was too scared to help her. Unfortunately, Elizabeth died once paramedics took her to the hospital, and it was because of acute toxicity with the mix of the painkillers and vodka. Eric heard on the morning news about her death and stated that he was mad at Lex for manipulating and exploiting Elizabeth to using prescription drugs. Lex was arrested for 17 felony counts and the drugs that were in the house. Eric said in this episode that he respects Lex after he took responsibility and for being honest with Elizabeth's death. In an interview days after Elizabeth died, Randy felt bad for Elizabeth and her family. Years after Elizabeth died, Randy married again in 2010 to a woman named Lynn. Some of the wrestlers said that Randy seemed a lot happier with his marriage to Lynn once Randy retired from wrestling. Randy worked in the Special Olympics as a sedentary person. In 2011, Randy receives a call from a medical center that his brother Randy and Randy's wife Lynn got into an automobile accident and that Randy was in critical condition. Randy unfortunately died hours later from a heart attack. Lanny shows us the area where his brother died, and you could still see flowers and stuff around the tree. Eric said that Randy was really good with kids, especially Hulk and Linda's kids when they were little. Everyone who was interviewed for this episode talked about how Elizabeth was a beautiful and inspiring woman for women's wrestling. Even though she didn't physically wrestle, but was a valet, she was unique and a classy woman who had that spark every time you saw her on TV. Interviewers for this episode are Jake the Snake Roberts, Eric Bischoff, Linda Hogan, Hulk Hogan's ex-wife, Bruce Pritchard, Lanny Poffo, Randy's brother, Scott Hall, and Jimmy Hart. It had been 5 years since this episode aired, and sadly some things have changed. Unfortunately, Lanny died on February 2nd, 2023, and is survived by his wife, daughter Megan or Megan. I'm not sure because when I checked online, the spellings for the name is a little different. And Megan's kids. Lanny was the last of Angelo's kids, as he only had Lanny and Randy Poffo. Scott Hall also passed away in 2022. Scott has his own episode, the first season, so I'm not done with him yet. I give this episode a 9 out of 10 since it should have been 2 parts. I remember when Randy passed away, WWE paid tribute to him with the song The Scientist by Coldplay. I think Randy was never in a close relationship with someone until he was with Elizabeth. After Elizabeth, he seemed to be at peace with his new wife. From what I could tell from other wrestlers who have locker room stories, it must have been a lot of pressure and machismo masculine men. He was also iconic with the Slim Jim commercials, but it's crazy to think that his entrance in wrestling was the graduation anthem. I'm glad that he patched things with Hulk Hogan before Randy passed away. Even though I'm not much of a Hogan fan, I think Randy was unfair to Hulk once his marriage started to crumble with Elizabeth. As for Elizabeth, I felt bad that she died so soon. Really tragic, but hopefully her family is doing better. Overall, she definitely looked like a Miss America winner if you put a crown on her. As for Lex, I hope he's doing okay since the whole drug thing. I heard he's better, but who knows? I think he was scared when Elizabeth stopped breathing because when my mom used to faint a lot when I was young, I would just stand there frozen and scared, but I don't know. You never know with people. Everyone's got their own opinion. I like how Randy was very kind to kids, as told by the people in this episode. Because sometimes when you see a kid smile, it's very rewarding, especially if you want to work in the area of working with kids. I hope someday for Elizabeth to be in the Hall of Fame, and I get her family blames wrestling for her untimely death, but with Vince gone, I think she should have a mark so that we can remember her for the great person she was in and out of wrestling. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this episode review, and more episode reviews are on the way. Take care of your mental health and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. Bye, guys.